Well, my definition of old-time music, since it's one of the oldest forms of music that's played in this country, it was the first, with the exception of Native American music, it was the first traditional old music that was played. It was brought over here mainly from the British Isles. That would be Scotland, England, and Ireland. There was some European influence, but for the most part, it was the British Isles and Ireland. And the type music was usually, it had a fiddle as a lead with a banjo also playing melody, and then the guitar came into the mix. But Granny said that she could remember times when there were just a fiddle player, and he was also the square dance caller as well. So to me, old time music means everybody's music, everyday music for everyday people. That's how I came up with my little definition of old time music. Where it applies to my family is that I don't ever remember a time in my growing up years that I wasn't surrounded by music. Somebody singing or playing. I can't ever remember a time when that wasn't happening. So I grew up, cut my teeth, grew up through my teenage years, and still am involved in the old time community there around home. The reason it's important to highlight these stories about past and present old-time traditional musicians that are women is they serve as role models for these young, wonderfully talented folks that are coming along today, like you, Tony, Susan Pepper, Ash Devine, Sarah Lynch, Thompson. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And I think that, well, past influences is important because it does act as a role model, and it shows these young gals that there is a place for them in this old-time music scene. Well, going from the apprentice to the mentor has been a pretty quick transition for me, because all of a sudden I looked around and all of the women that were around me playing music were in their 30s or in their 40s, and some of them even younger. There's some really great teenage musicianers, as Granny used to say out there. But it's been an interesting transition to go from being an apprentice all my life. That's how I considered myself, was an apprentice to these older women, the ones in my family especially. And now to find myself suddenly in that mentor position, all these young girls deferring to me, I'm getting really relaxed into that, being a mentor as opposed to being as an apprenticeship and always needing something from whoever the resource was. Now I can sit back and be the resource and just say whatever I take a notion to say.
It sounds like your granny was a big inspiration to you.
She was.
She played music?
Yes, she did. She was a great ballad singer. She played a little bit of banjo, but not a whole bunch. But she was the one that told me about the women in my family that did play music. I had a great-grandmother that was one whale of a banjo player. That's the way Granny put it. And I asked her, I said, well, why didn't you tell me when you told me that Grandpap Teet played the fiddle? Why didn't you mention that Mother played the banjo? And she said, well, you ain't asked me until now. So, but I did find out that I did have a great-grandmother who played banjo. Well, ballad singing, as far as I'm concerned, is where that they took all of the gory love songs and all, and made them into country and western music, because the old country Knoxville girl is straight from the Oxford Tragedy, which is an old English ballad that's been around for hundreds of years, and it went from being the Oxford Tragedy to being the Knoxville girl, which it fits. If you think about it, it would fit right in there exactly where they were talking about the Oxford Tragedy and the girl from Oxford who gets murdered. That goes right along with the old ballad, Knoxville girl just being a jazzed up version of it. But the ballad tradition has been alive in my family, we know, as far back as 7 generations. And that's passing down from one generation to the younger generation down. Then they would pass it down to the still younger generation, and that's how it went down through my family. And the way I started out learning was knee to knee. and one of the older women, and they were all, there were 9 traditional ballad singers when I was growing up, and 7 of them were women. So the ballad tradition was primarily kept by the women in my little area over there in my community. And I would sit across from them with my knees almost touching them, and they would sing a verse. And then I would have to sing it back to them with all the embellishments and all the tune. I would have to catch the song, the words, the tune, and all the embellishments. And if I didn't do it right the first time, I had to start at the beginning and sing it back. Then they would sing the second verse, and I would have to sing the first and second verse back to them with all the stuff that they would put, because they did a lot of trills and funny things with their voices. Like in My Dearest Dear, it goes, my dearest dear, the time draws near when you and I must part. So I had to do all of that back after hearing it just one time. The only difference now is that I do have the ability to provide the words for them, whereas my family would have had to have written the words out to all of them, and they just didn't want to take time to do that. And so what I had to do was it was a strictly audio tradition when I was coming along, but now I do provide words for them because I have that capability. And everybody says, well, that's not really fair. I mean, the way that you had to learn them was, yeah, but the way, if they had have had a way to have reproduced those words for me, they would have done it, because, you know, they were innovative as they could be, those mountain people over home were. And I know that Granny could read and write because she went to school through the 6th grade, and her handwriting was just beautiful. But now my mother graduated from college. She went on to Asheville Normal Teachers College. I think Daddy made it through 11th grade, which back then was getting your high school diploma. So education became more, it was more of a goal, I think, for the younger folks in that community. But a lot of the older people could not read and write, so that might have been one of the reasons that they leaned so heavily on the audio, you know, catching it that way instead of them writing it down. Right. Well, Deli Chandler Norton was my granny. She was my great aunt, but I called her Granny because my grandmother passed away when I was 5, right before I turned 5. And I adopted Granny as my grandmother because my paternal grandmother passed away before I was born. So I went looking for a grandmother, and she filled the job to a T. So I adopted her, and she really didn't have anything to say about it. So she was a great influence. Her sister, Brazilla Wallen, was a big influence on my ballad singing. Evelyn Ramsey was also a big influence. These were just women there around home that sang. Inez Chandler, big inspiration. And also then, meanwhile, I was listening to the radio like everybody else was in the 60s, and Dolly Parton, Loretta Lynn, I think the two of them inspired all the girls there around home that ever had a thought about singing or any of that business. They were all inspired by Dolly and Loretta. And then there's some of the younger musicians today. Rhiannon Giddens has really inspired me simply because she sings Black is a Color on a couple of her albums, I think. And she sings it in the old mountain style. Etta Baker was a big influence on me. She learned how to play banjo when she was 87 years old, and I taught her first song, I will have to say. We were on tour together at that time, so Etta learned her first banjo tune, which is Going Down This Road Feeling Bad, when she was 87. There's also Elizabeth Laprelle. There's, as I mentioned earlier, Susan Pepper, Ash Devine, Sarah O. Lynch, Thompson. There's so many of these young women that are coming along. The Presley girls, they're a really wonderful duo of sisters that play and sing, beautiful harmony. So, and the Coon Creek girls and the New Coon Creek girls. I've been inspired by both of them, been on tour with the New Coon Creek girls before. So really appreciate, now what is her name? Dale Ann Bradley. One of the finest voices I've ever heard anywhere, and Waiting for the Piney Rose to Bloom is one of my favorite songs. One of them that she sings. From the women that I've mentioned, I've learned just about everything I know about the music. Rhiannon and Etta Baker both played a lot of blues sounding, but you could still hear the blues in Etta Baker's version of Going Down This Road Feeling Bad, which I thought was just amazing. And with Rhiannon, you can still hear when she sings Black is the Color or My Dearest Dear, you can still hear in it that blues kind of influence. But there's still Appalachian ballads, you can hear that as well, that she sings. And the song that I taught Etta was still an old time piece. It was just influenced, but that's the way that it's been. Each and every person I mentioned earlier, like Evelyn Ramsey, Brazilla Walling, Granny Dale, they all influenced my entire life. Not just the music, but my entire life. I learned everything from them. Dolly Parton, I've seen her pull herself out of some pretty tight situations on stage just with that sense of humor that she's got. Loretta Lynn's a lot the same way. I've heard her just dress people up and down, and do it in such a way that made them feel good about it. So I've learned quite a bit from observing and being around all of these people. Now, I've never met Dolly, never met Loretta, but I feel like they're as close as family. The one thing that the love songs did for me, and old-time music as a general rule has done for me, has saved my life. Because there's been so many times in my life when I would get depressed or down, being a single mom, raising kids by yourself, and sometimes the only thing, and losing people out of your life, losing loved ones, to death. I always fell back into the arms of those love songs and somehow would be able to pull myself out of the depression or out of the feeling blue or whatever I was going, whatever was going on, because there's a lot of body ballads in there too that I learned from those older women over home. So I can always fall back to those and laugh my way out of just about everything. So in answer to that question, they taught me everything I know about life. And that went hand in hand with the music because it was so intertwined with every day, every single day. I think out of all the questions, this was the hardest one for me to try to answer because, mountain people have this thing about putting on airs. But at the same time, I would like to be able to believe that I have influenced the young women that I have had in my life in one way or another, much the same as I was influenced by the older women in my life. So I would like to think they took away not just a song, but maybe a story, maybe something that'll help them down the road, toward greener pastures or whatever. Or if they're feeling blue, I hope they remember, well, Sheila said to fall right back into the arms of the love songs and you'll be fine. And as far as being innovative, I have actually made the step now to where I have started singing some with Susan Pepper, been singing quite a bit with Ash Devine, and these younger gals, that are coming along. And they do such beautiful harmony that I'm even letting them start to put a little harmony to the love songs, which is that's a step into the future away from the way I learned them, because there was no harmony, there was no instrumentation that you could put behind them. They had to be sung solo and a cappella. That was just the way they were done. So
that's just the ballads.
That's just the ballads. Now the old time music, the banjo especially, was just wide open. You can do anything you want to with the banjo because it's so loud. It'll just, if nothing else, it knocks you out of your boots because it's loud and kind of aggressive and in your face. But at the same time, it can be played awful pretty too. Early on, it was sexual come-ons from men. That's obviously been some time ago. I don't have to worry about that so much now. And the other kind of frustrating thing for me was going to an award ceremony for traditional or old-time music, and every single person was a white, older man. And I would always get so frustrated because I knew that I didn't mention Alice Gerard and Hazel Dickens, and they certainly influenced my music as well. You know, sit there and watch Alice sitting at a table right beside you, knowing that she's done more collecting than this person that's walking across the stage just because he's a man to get the award. So yeah, I have had run-ins in both those situations that were unpleasant. It's important that anybody who is outstanding in their field, be they man or female, a male or female, it doesn't matter. They should receive the same identical, accolades and applause and all that stuff for both. But it just seems to me that men do get a lot more awards than women do. We, unfortunately, the music, old-time music, is exactly like any other genre of music, or in the arts, being an artist, any kind of business, any kind of religion, even politics. It's a misogynistic world that we live in. Men are just the ones that receive the awards and all of the praise and glory. It hadn't changed from the time that my mother was a girl. It's still exactly the same way as when she was a girl, and she was born in 1916. So I do know that I've got 2 cousins who are pharmacists. One's male, one's female, and he makes more money than she does just because he's a man, and that she does the same exact job. So it's pretty prevalent throughout our society, so why would it be any different in old-time music? To give you an idea, I had a cousin that was hired to go up and perform for the National Folk Festival, and they offered to pay him $1,800. Well, they offered me $1,000. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I've just received the NEA Award and the State Heritage Award in North Carolina, and I heard y'all were paying $1,800. So thank you, cousin of mine. And they paid me $1,800. It's hard to get around that if you hear it from the horse's mouth. So, and I will say this about women: they are more apt to do something for $500 that a man can get $1,500 for, simply by saying, "Oh no, I can't do it for that. I'm going to have at least $1,500." Okay, but a woman will do it for $500 without even asking for, the extra $1,000, because we've been taught that, well, if you don't do it for this, then we'll just get some man to do it. We might have to pay him a little more, but we'll get him to do it. And it's almost like, as a woman, you are primed to jump at every situation, every possible opportunity to perform. But I still think we're looked at as second-class citizens, even in the music genres. As a matter of fact, I was waiting backstage with Betty Smith, who is a great singer. And she, I think, is 96 now. But we were laughing just recently about the time that we were sitting backstage, and this guy who was MC in the festival come back and said, "Okay, girls, come on, hop on stage. Now's your time to shine." Boy, Betty Smith dressed him up and down for doing that. She said, "Well, I want you to clearly know that I am not a girl. I am a woman, and so is Sheila." So like I say, I've been in the presence of some pretty outspoken women. So that time Betty Smith and she is the sweetest person ever was, but she was not going to be called a girl. Yeah, Etta Baker didn't put up with any of that foolishness either. She would call somebody on it. She'd say, "Lord, honey, I have been around so long. How could you call me a girl?" Because I've been more or less lucky when it comes to job performances and all, because the jobs that I do get now, I get paid for. But I think it has to do with winning those awards I mentioned more than anything else, because that kind of puts your name out there as reaching, you've reached this top point here. So what I had to say about that was, well, the only way then from here on out is down. So I've absolutely sworn to myself I'm not going to lower my standards, period, ever. for the same reason that I said a while ago. I think it's just, we expect men to take the lead position, regardless of whether, all the way from stagehand down to being the main performer. We're just so used to all of that being a man's place. And a woman's place is to accompany, the men folk. And I think as long as we continue to be locked into that, looking at females as sort of lower class citizens, and that's the only way that it can be put. I mean, those are pretty harsh words, but I firmly believe that that's exactly what it is. Until women start to speak out, then it's always going to be a situation that's relayed through the mouths of men. I think it's worse now than it's been in a long time. I think that women are, well, a good example is the Supreme Court Justice that was just got nominated and approved finally. I'm sure, everybody knows that she had 2 strikes against her. One, she was a female, and the other was the color of her skin. So she managed to survive and persevere through. But, that's hard to do when it's old-time music. I mean, but a woman has got to be aggressive. She's got to be strong, just like our Chief Justice, or our Justice to the Supreme Court was. She never faltered. She kept her eye on the prize, and now she's sitting on the court. So I think that's what we all have to do as women, is be assertive and not let men get away with any crap. And we know when it's crap.
Yeah.
Every woman in the world knows when it's crap. It's just we've been taught to let it slide, let it go, don't trouble, don't, rock the boat, trouble the waters, just be a good girl and sit. Well, that's not the way that we can be if we're going to make any strides in old-time music. We can't sit back and be passive. If you've got a writing talent, write about it. If you've got a talking talent, which I've been told I do, then talk about it. Do everything that you possibly can. I've been thinking about getting a hold of one of the little periodical magazine or newspaper-like magazines that come out there around home, and writing an article about traditional ballad singing, because that's how you do it, and it has to be written by women in order for women to get the credit for it. If it continues to be written by men, then they'll continue to get credit for it. But I think if women start being more willing to take on the job, that'll make a big difference in the way women are treated in this genre of music. That truly is the only way that we're going to make any strides as far as becoming equal partners. I'm not talking about pulling ahead of the men. I'm just talking about equal sharing of, all of this great music that's out there, and receiving the right, acclaim and all of that stuff that men do. It's just so hard, because somebody will mention 5 ballad singers to me before they finally get to a woman. Well, in my family, you mention the 5 women first, because they were the ones that was keeping the tradition alive. So it's got to be a little, and women are good at doing that. We've done it for generation after generation, made men think that they were in charge when it was really us. We just now need to really make them see that it's us. Well, what would be really cool is if you're going to take this exhibit out on the road, then wherever you're going to be, find the women that do the music and have them there at the, along with the exhibit, to, even if they're not in the exhibit, find out who they are. All you got to do is go to some little store and say, "Where's that woman that sings those songs?" You'd be amazed how they'll start pointing in every direction, saying, "Well, there's one that lives." "No, I don't know if she's still singing or not, but there's one down at the bottom here of this road." That's how you have to do it. You have to be dedicated to getting the word out in every way that you possibly can, whether it's writing, singing, talking, having conversations with people about it. Because a lot of people don't know there's women that are involved, that are really involved in old-time music. A lot of folks don't realize that. They do think that it's pretty much an all-male, because that's who they hear about. So we have to change that. And the way that we can change it is, I'm really glad y'all are doing this exhibit, but I think you have to utilize the people as you go along, the women, as wherever you go, you ought to have at least one there that's going to be in there talking about how important this exhibit is. Well, you know, it's, and the other thing that women, I think, have probably made serious strides at getting over is the jealousy amongst each other. I don't see that as much as I used to. It's more like a sisterhood now of people in this community, instead of women scratching and clawing and trying to get at the top of the heap anymore. I think, and that's what we have to do, is learn how to stand collectively as a group and an important part of the community as a whole. When I first started out, it was especially bad. You know, the backstabbing, as you'd call it, and the rumor mills and all of this stuff, that any way to possibly knock somebody out of a job and that you could take from them. But I don't run into that as much now. It's like things have calmed down as far as that goes. I don't see a lot of this cutthroat stuff going on with the younger musicians as it was in my generation. I do know that, well, a really good one is how Patsy Cline and Loretta Lynn stuck together through a lot of their bad experiences with their husbands, and, you know, with the music, making community and all. I think but they remained close friends, and they were a force to be reckoned with when they were together. And I think, well, I can tell you that there are women out there that you would not believe who would undercut. Like if I had agreed to do something for $500, they would come in and agree to do it for $200. So it was pretty cutthroat back when I first started out. And that's happened to me more times than once. Because I love it. I mean, I just love it. And it's saved my life too many times. We should appreciate old-time music because it's it's everyday music for everyday people. That would be the main reason. And there's a history that I just love. I can just imagine them carrying these tunes in their hearts and in their minds all the way from across the ocean to come here and live here in these mountains which are so isolated. Granny said it was a lot better to sing songs about spirits and sprites and lords and ladies than it was to be trapped in a 10 by 10. Now that was a 10-foot by 10-foot log cabin, maybe with a little loft in it for the children to sleep in the loft at night. And she said it was a lot better to sing about the women that were over there in fine silk gowns and everything than it was to be trapped with 4 babies under the age of 6 with nothing to do except work. So she said we did a lot of singing back then, back in the day. So that would have been back in the early 1900s. If I'm outside and got a particularly rough go at it trying to stack a wood pile or something, then I'll find myself going right back and singing the old love songs that they would sing whenever they had hard work to do. I have a daughter who is singing the traditional ballads, and I have a cousin who is doing the traditional ballads, and she's also learning banjo now. So my hope rides on the shoulders of Melanie Rice Penland and Donna Ray Norton Swan. Those are the 2 that I expect to carry this tradition of our family into the next century. I've done my best. I've got it into this one. So it's their job to make sure that it survives into the next one.